So Tracy, what got you into the field of working memory?
It actually happened because my very first project right out of my PhD was looking at how children in kindergarten learn. And there was one little boy that really stood out to me. He loved being at school, and he would run up and want to answer all our questions. But as we were tracking these students throughout the year, we noticed that he was starting to have real difficulties. He would raise his hand, but he would forget what he wanted to say. Or he'd feel really frustrated and he'd say, "Oh, don't ask me, it fell out of my head again." And so we started to wonder what was wrong, and we had a closer look and we found his IQ was average, but yet he was in the bottom when it came to language and math. And so I started looking at all these other cognitive tests that we had done and found that it was working memory that was the key.
What is your take on rhymes and the working memory? Sir.
I know we talked a little bit about this on social media, Tony. I think that rhyming and working memory are very closely related. One of the key pieces of research that's been coming out recently is this idea of rhythm, which I love. So the way we remember information in sequence is located in the same part of the brain as rhythm. So when you go bump, ba-dum, bump, that's using your working memory in as much as it would to remember that rhythm. Not as much pitch. So if you have to remember a high note versus a low note, it doesn't involve working memory to the same extent. But rhyming, we know, is one of the key building blocks to reading. So one of the things they say that if you want to teach a kid how to learn how to read, listen to Tony.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Thanks for the plug. That's right. That is right. I am not only a rhyming book reviewer, I'm also an educator. Now, besides rhyme and rhythm, what other things are out there too that help better or improve working memory?
Oh, there are loads of things. Are you talking specifically with music or just across the board?
Across the board.
Yeah, one of the things I've been doing on my Instagram page is posting. I called it the 7-Day Memory Challenge, and I've been trying to post a little tip from one of my books every day to help memory. And Tony and I were just talking about peppermint. There's research to show that when you put a drop or two of peppermint in a diffuser, and the same is true of rosemary, because what it does, it helps information flow better, and it releases a neurotransmitter to actually improve memory. Now, lavender, chamomile, they don't do that. It's specifically peppermint and rosemary. But they even found that peppermint tea has the same positive effects for memory.
Now, do the Altoids that I'm chewing on, does that count? The artificial stuff?
It's good for your breath, Tony, which smells good from over here. but no, it's specifically an essential oil. So it's actually the pure peppermint that you're looking at. And you need it to be high strength. And that's what they use in the research studies too.
All right, Tracy. Well, you and I have some like-minded interests in this, and I want to ask. Okay, so I finished my research for my master's thesis in dating and college students, so I'm interested. You have an article featured in Cosmopolitan magazine. Your article is on backstalking your date. Can you give the listeners a little synopsis about that?
Yes, so I mean, now with online dating, you kind of want to know a little bit about the person that you're going to meet up with or get to know a little bit online. And so this article was talking about whether or not you should backstalk someone. And actually, I've had a lot of questions come in since then. Should you backstalk your colleagues? What about friends? Should you backstalk your friends? Just dating aside. So clearly it's a topic of interest. And my take on it, my own research, I've looked at a lot of social media in different aspects. And I was interested in how social media can actually encourage empathy. So while backstalking can give you information about a person that, could be red flags, could be, for physical safety, but it can also help you develop empathy because you may not know something about them, and that may help you engage a little bit more closely with them. It may help you connect with them a little bit more. So from my own research, I found that when we are personally engaged on social media, like by commenting or sharing likes, rather than what I call impersonal engagement, like sharing a link, that we're more likely to show higher levels of empathy as well.
Ooh, 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 ooh. Oh man, oh wow. All right, so my social media fans, are you guys taking notes on this? Are you taking notes for your mental noggin over here? For your noggins? Seriously, empathy is in social media, man. Comment, like, and share. Please, man. Also remember that too, man. Remember, you're empathizing. You want to build with your brand. Build with your people. Now, is there a difference between stalking and backstalking? I don't know, everybody normally says stalking. So is there a difference?
I think the name, obviously stalking, the label isn't very complimentary, but the whole idea of backstalking is really that you're trying to find out a little bit more about that individual. You know, do they like dogs? Can you talk about dogs when you hang out with them? And again, I think this whole activity can be very positive in that it can help generate empathy as you meet and get to know and get to connect with someone.
Okay, yes, that's true.
What I do think is interesting, though, sorry, things that, I talk a lot about this too with my graduate class, and I love also this idea of technology. It does change the way that we engage in social reactions. So on the one hand, you have a very positive way to encourage empathy and get to know a person from that side. But also, if you have your phone with you, studies have found that if you have your phone with you when you're on a speed dating setup or something, you're more likely to rate that person negatively, unfavorably. You're more likely to say, oh, they weren't very funny, I don't think I want that second date with them, compared to if you just have a book next to you on the table. So this idea that, while your phone, your technology, your social media is fantastic, you're actually trying to make that connection with someone, that can be a hindrance because you're viewing that as a gateway to other possibilities rather than taking time to spend with that person in front of you.
Ooh, that almighty phone, I swear. It's always reigns superior. But yeah, that's rude. After watching a TEDx talk, I was like blown away because I thought, it was all about the traditional, like it's more beneficial, but you actually describe benefits to social media. There's a contrary belief that you'd be less empathetic over social media, but you have proved not.
No, I think it's very positive. And in fact, a larger piece of that research, which I didn't talk about in the TEDx, but I've done a number of blog posts on Psychology Today, is looking at the idea of narcissism. And there's a huge concern, as you know, this concern that Generation Y is Generation me, and that we're becoming more narcissistic. We're kind of obsessed with selfies and everything that technology opens up and social media opens up. And really, I wanted to know, is this true, or are we just kind of scaremongering here? We're just kind of saying, oh, it's all bad, stop reading, or just, the kind of arguments that we would have had when books first came out. So I actually gave our participants a narcissistic scale as well as an empathy scale. And I looked at a whole range of social media use, from the images that they posted, the regularity in which they posted images, selfies, profile pictures, and I found that by and large, they weren't high narcissistic tendencies linked to social media. In fact, people were using it to connect, and as a result, they were becoming more empathetic.
Now, there is a funny thing. Comedians make fun of this, and actually a lot of people talk about this too, when it comes to memory in sexes. Now, but I want to ask you this question. Is it a fact or a myth that women have better memories than men?
As a woman, we are definitely better in memory. No, I'm kidding. No, actually, the truth is that we have terrible memories when it comes to events in the past. So when you look at eyewitness testimony, there is so much false memory there. We've done fun studies where you have someone walk into class, do something dramatic, and walk out, and they still can't even identify, was he wearing a blue shirt or a green shirt? Was he blonde, brunette? Just even those details like that, we're not very good at remembering that information, and that's across, male and females there.
I have a friend who's a correctional officer, and he told me the story about how him and his coworkers had to be tested on a simulated practice, and they had to view a video, I guess, with inmates, and their objective was to find out what was each inmate doing. And while they were watching this video, they were, a pink elephant or a pink bunny was walking and roaming around the room. And at the end of the video, the superior officers ask the correction officers, okay, so what did you notice? And one correction officer was like, oh, I noticed XYZ with this inmate. And the other one's like, I know XYZ with this inmate. And the third one's like, yeah, I noticed also this was occurring within these two inmates. But at the end of it all, they never pointed out that there was a pink bunny, pink elephant walking around the room. I thought that was really, really, really interesting.
I know, and that's one of the things that I talk about in the TEDx as well that I gave. This idea of how our attention is usually what I call a spotlight brain. That in the past we have decided that we focus on one thing at a time. So if you're focused just on trying to identify people in the lineup, you're kind of shutting out that pink rabbit, dancing around. But I think what we found with social media, we did a study with adults across different ages, and we found that people who use social media more had what I called a floodlight brain. So instead of focusing just on one thing like that spotlight, they could actually accommodate a whole range of information, and they were much better at having this, floodlight perspective and taking in multiple pieces of information.
Now, a friend asked me this question, and I also want to ask as well, because I want to have this answered by you, the authority. Now, with the rise of social media and the vast ways of getting knowledge, is there such thing as information overload?
There's definitely information overload, but it's not technology that's to blame. We can have information overload in everyday life. Think of when you're driving, maybe it's raining, the roads are wet, it's dark, maybe they close off your usual way home, so now you have to process finding a new way home. Your phone battery just died, so you kind of have to go from memory. You don't have Siri to kind of talk you through, turn left in 500 feet and so on. You're trying to anticipate all the different traffic. That's information overload right there. So we don't need technology to experience that, but certainly we may experience it more just because technology is so prevalent. But I think that's where good working memory comes in, Tony, because if you have good working memory, you can kind of process and juggle information more effectively.
Yeah.
Yes, and I like that we're looking at on the show today on working memory, and basically the working memory is all about prioritizing what is important versus what is not important. And I remember in your TEDx talk, you talked about working memory and how it prioritizes information. Do you think that sometimes the brain can play a Jedi mind tricks in how it prioritizes information? For example, there are a lot of useless things that go viral on social media, like cat videos. There's this one YouTube channel where a guy goes around his house breaking things, yet people remember that. Since memory is a cognitive thing, sometimes even the most unimportant stuff can rise to the top over other things that could be seen as important. Can you explain that phenomena of why this occurs?
Yes, and I think one of the key reasons for that is that memory is not just cognitive, it's emotional. Like those cat videos. We remember cat videos because studies have actually found watching cat videos make us feel happier. I'm not a cat person. I love all animals equally, but that research actually shows that people reported their mood as being happier, being better after watching a funny little cat video and so on. So there's strong emotion involved. Maybe things go viral often because they're very evocative, and it makes you laugh or it makes you angry, and so you want to react or respond. In our own research, we were looking at emotional contagion, this idea of contagious, things going viral like you're talking about. And certainly we know that joy and happiness is very highly contagious. So think about, at a football game, if something goes well, you're up there cheering, everyone's cheering with you, you feel like crying. It's very exciting because you're part of the moment. And, maybe afterwards when you're talking about it to someone else, they're kind of looking at you like, why would you cry at that? Because they don't have that same sense of that contagion at that moment. And so certainly our memories have a very strong emotional aspect. And while it's wonderful, it also means that sometimes we falsely remember information. So going back to that whole pink rabbit, if we're emotionally connected to one piece of what we're seeing, then we encode that more strongly as a result, correctly or incorrectly so.
I love that whole, this new word out there. It's called hacks. Things that'll help, make your life convenient, that'll like speed things up, make it better. It's like the MacGyvering things. Like, what would you say are some hacks, some mental hacks for memory?
Yeah, one hack is doodle, and I posted it on my Instagram account as well. There's a study that showed that when you doodle, when you have to do a really boring task, you are more likely to remember that information and stay focused rather than daydream and tune out completely. So that's the first hack: is grab a pen and paper and doodle while someone's talking about a topic you're not interested in. Just don't let them see you do that. The second hack I can give you is is take your lunch outdoors. A study was looking at the benefits of being outdoors, but specifically nature. So if you have a chance to walk in a park, do that over a kind of city busy area, downtown area. That being at the park has what is known as a restorative effect, and it actually found a huge boost in working memory. So you're going to come back more productive to your workplace.
I love the 7 books that you have. Now, I just want to ask, do you have any other books that are in the making?
Yeah, the 8th book is actually coming out. It's actually a clinical textbook where we're looking at different clinical disorders, ADHD. I've done a lot of my research on different kinds of learning difficulties, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, motor difficulties. We're looking at anxiety disorders as well. So this book is meant to be a textbook for both undergraduates and graduate students, where you're getting cutting edge research about what's the kind of difficulties these individuals are having, but also what's the research, what's the word on the street when it comes to training? Can we offer anything beyond medication, neurofeedback? What's the actual research on that? How effective are these kinds of treatments? And where's the future leading us when it comes to these different clinical diagnoses?
All right, now settling into our 4 questions from my listeners and viewers. Brett asks, what is the connection between our reliance on technology like calendars and apps reminding us to do things and our memory?
And a lot of times people used to think that, our memory is getting worse. What's going on? We've got technology, we're actually going to remember less information. And in my own research, I found that isn't the case. In fact, all we're doing is shifting what we remember. It's this notion of transactive memory. So a study found that when people were given flags of countries to memorize and told that you can find the information in these folders on your computer desktop, they weren't very good at remembering the flags that go with each country. But they were right, spot on, really accurate in remembering exactly what folder that information was in. So it's shifted. For sure. And it's also freed up our working memory, because now we don't have to keep this big encyclopedia of knowledge. Now we can use our working memory to actually process that information. So let's take a medical issue. Let's say, your doctor, you say, I have this really horrible shoulder pain, doc, what can I do? He gives you a whole slew of information. You have to use your working memory to keep all that in mind in the old days. But now you've got all these, WebMD and so on. You can look everything up, and instead you use your working memory to process. Does that symptom apply to me? Did that happen to me? So you're sifting through. It's this idea again of processing, prioritizing, and filtering what's relevant and what isn't. So it's made us more efficient. It's made our memory way more efficient.
All right, Tracy, thank you. Derek asks, how come it is hard for him to remember a name but not a face? This is the same situation I have too when it comes to me being at parties.
And in part, this is back to this idea of overload. We have so much when it comes to verbal information. We have so much information to remember, but visually, there are far few faces. So if you think of it like a stack of index cards, you only have a set number of faces that you keep in mind, so it's easier to encode these unique features, and again, you've got, not only do you have less information when it comes to faces, less store, but you also they're more salient. In other words, they're more memorable. You can say, her eyes were stunning, how could I forget that? Or her hair, she had these purple highlights. So very memorable moments. In contrast, names are far more common, and so it's much easier to get mixed up. And we know that from research, even when you look at reading with young children, this familiarity effect. The more familiar something is, it's harder sometimes to remember, and you get very confused. And so you met a Brian last night, you met a Brian 5 years ago. How do you kind of sift between those two Brians?
So true.
All right. Greg Dixon asks, how come people with Alzheimer's and dementia can remember things from 30 to 40 years ago, but not now?
And that's a great question, and we talk about that in my book, Working Memory Advantage. We have a chapter looking specifically at memory and Alzheimer's. And one of the things is because the way in which we use long-term memory, you can think about that as your library. It's stored in a part of the brain known as the hippocampus, and it's your library. And so some of those books, if you will, as part of Alzheimer's, get eaten away. So some of those older memories, they may not remember their best friend from grade school, but they may remember their pet's name when they were in kindergarten. So some of those memories from their childhood are retained and some aren't. Just if you think about worms kind of making their way, eating through those books. When it comes to working memory or new information, that's a different set of processes, and it uses the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And so that has active memory, if you think about it. So you have to think about what's going on now, where am I now? And you often see with Alzheimer's, and we're actually just tomorrow starting a study with an elderly population looking at memory and stress and anxiety and ways that we can relieve that. And we find that, that part of the brain they feel very disoriented, and it's all linked into the PSC, the front of the brain. And so that's why it's harder for them to even get that new information in to begin with.
All right. Bobby Kuntz asks, what can we do to increase the chances to recall the information on demand?
That is a great question. And actually, one of the fun studies, and I bring this up in a lot of my classes, is that in Japan, a group of researchers compared a chimpanzee's working memory with an adult. And they found that the chimp outperformed the adult every single time. But again, it was a visual task. And, we were talking about visual versus verbal memory a bit earlier. And if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, the chimps have to take in the scene. They have to process danger versus safety very quickly and visually, not acoustically, not verbally. And so as adults, we've actually shifted to looking for verbal cues. We don't look at a scene immediately and look for danger unless it's part of our training, part of our profession, and so on. But typically, we're focused more on the verbal part, and that's kind of evolved to accommodate that. And so that's one of the big reasons. But if you want to remember something on demand, that's exactly right. It's an issue of retrieval. And that's to try to think about how you store that information to begin with. And there's lots of great tricks. One thing we know is location, location, location. If you remembered studying for that information in your living room, go back in your mind to that exact location, and that can help kind of unlock that memory too.
There's a question from the Instagram audience. What about the limitless pill?
So this idea of neurotropics or nootropics or kind of these memory enhancement pills is kind of cutting edge science for sure. But that's actually one of the things I talk about in one of my courses is, can you take a pill for memory? And the question is the trade-off. When you get something, what do you lose in return? Some people talk about huge physical side effects like nausea, feeling confused, disoriented as a result. And actually they did a study looking at these kinds of limitless type pills and comparing that with caffeine, and they found there wasn't a huge difference in the memory boosting power. So if you really need a little jolt, caffeine is great. But a kind of hack for your listeners right now, caffeine is good only when you have to work with information you already know. Caffeine actually dulls you if you have to try to process and take in new information. So it's not great for learning new things, but it's great for helping you, when you need to synthesize and process information.
And last question, Tracy, where can people find you?
They can find me online. I'm on social media, Tracy P. Alloway. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I have a Facebook page, Tracy Alloway, and I have a website, tracyalloway.com. I'd love to connect with you on social media. I'd love for you to find me on my website. I have the TEDx video on my website, tracyalloway.com. I'd love for you to watch it and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think.